Hello, and welcome to Supplemental Security Income, SSI, for young adults. My name is Renee Averett-Sanzoni, and I'm with the Parents Place of Maryland. I will be your moderator for today's presentation from Michael Dalto with High Note Consulting. For those of you who may not be familiar with Parents Place of Maryland, I want to take a minute to share a little bit about us. PPMD's mission is to empower families as advocates and partners in improving education and health outcomes for their children with disabilities and special health care needs. We are Maryland's Parent Training and Information Center, Family-to-Family Health Information Center, as well as the state affiliate for Family Voices. We are mostly funded through federal and state grants and have been in operation for over 25 years. We are a family-founded and run organization, and we assist families to navigate the education and healthcare systems. We do this by providing one-on-one assistance, information and resources for families and providers, workshops and training for families and providers statewide, parent leadership development, and we work and advocate to promote systems change to improve services for families and children and youth with special health care needs and disabilities. If you would like more information about PPMD and our services, please go to our website at www.ppmd.org, like us on Facebook, or give us a call. Today's guest speaker is Michael Dalto with High Note Consultant. Michael is a big old benefits geek. He has delivered presentations on benefits and work incentives to thousands of people with disabilities, family members, and professionals since 1989. He created state certification for Maryland benefits counselors and provided training and technical assistance for the certification. He oversaw benefits counseling for the Promise Grant, a research grant that served youths who receive SSI and their families. He also consulted with the Institute for Community Inclusion of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, on the SGA project, a research effort that tested interventions to support vocational rehabilitation consumers in Kentucky and Minnesota to work their way off of Social Security disability insurance benefits. He has written training materials about benefits and provided technical assistance to Virginia Commonwealth University National Training and Data Center. He now consults with Griffin Hammis Associates and the National Association of Blind Merchants. Welcome, Michael, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Thank you very much, Renee, and thank you to everyone for joining the webinar today. I have a son who is now 28 years old, so please promise, if you ever meet him, not to tell him that I told this story in public, because it occurred while he was toilet training. But after months of practicing this new skill, I both agreed to test run. He was a big boy, underpants, and no diaper, and I strapped him into his car seat, and I drove about 50 minutes, and every single minute I turned around and asked him, "Have to go?" He kept shaking his head no. I arrived at the car. I unstrapped him, lifted him to his. You're all parents, so naturally, you know what I discovered. He was so bad. And I looked at him and I said, "I asked you every minute if you had to go. Why didn't you say something?" He looked at me with these big innocent eyes and said, "But I wanted it to be a surprise." That was the day that I learned that my son might have a future working for Social Security, because you usually get the information you need from them, but it's often a little bit too late. So I hope that you're getting this information today in a timely way when you need it. As Renee mentioned, if you have individual questions that are specific to your family that may not be appropriate to answer during the webinar, please contact Renee and I'd be happy to answer them offline. However, if you have questions of a more general nature, we will be breaking periodically during the session. So, next slide.
Yeah, and Michael, I'm getting some chat that I'm kind of breaking in and out. So I need to share with the audience that you are on your cell phone and unfortunately live in a part of the state that's a little sometimes patchy with some cell phone coverage. So please bear with us. We are recording the webinar for those of you that have asked, and it will be posted on our website, as well as Michael's PowerPoint presentation. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Renee. I'll try to get into the sweet spot here. Is that better?
Yes, it sounds much better. Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay, great. Thank you, Renee. And we're ready to advance to the next slide.
We're on the slide of who's eligible for SSI?
Yes, that would be great.
Perfect. We are there.
Okay. So Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is the primary benefit based on disability that young people can receive from Social Security, although many older people can receive it as well. To be eligible for it, you have to either have a significant disability or be at least 65 years old, even if you're not disabled. Have to be a U.S. citizen or a legal alien who meets certain requirements. And you have to have income and resources, another term for assets, that are below certain limits. So the idea of the SSI program is that it's designed to ensure that eligible people have at least a basic minimum level of income to pay for food and shelter. So there's a logic to the program. If you have income from other sources, generally you'll receive less SSI. If you have no other income from other sources, you can receive up to the maximum amount, because in theory you would need the full amount to be able to pay for food and shelter. Okay, next slide, please. So how disabled does a person need to be? Well, an adult, and we're going to focus primarily on adults 18 and older during today's session, must have a severe disability that has lasted or is expected to last at least 12 months, or it's a terminal illness. And the disability usually has to limit the person's ability to work, but not prevent him or her from working. One of the biggest and most devastating myths about SSI is that a person must be incapable of working in order to qualify for benefits. It's absolutely not true. There are many people who qualify for SSI who are not only capable of working, but who are even working at the time they apply for SSI benefits. The disability does have to be significant enough that it limits the person's ability to do what Social Security calls substantial work, or the term they use officially is substantial gainful activity. Now, in 2018, a person may be considered to be doing substantial gainful activity or substantial work if she or he is earning at least $1,180 a month gross wages. In 2019, that amount will go up to $1,220 a month. So someone earning below that, or who's considered only capable of earning less than that amount, would be determined not able to do substantial work and could be eligible for SSI when they initially apply. Now, I do want to note that this substantial work requirement for SSI purposes only applies when the individual is applying for benefits in their first month of eligibility. It does not apply after the person has begun receiving SSI. At that point, they can earn more and still be eligible for SSI. We'll get into that a little later. Now, if a person is getting SSI based on blindness rather than any other disability, then they're not subject to that substantial work test. They could actually be earning more than what would be considered substantial gainful activity, even at the time they apply, and still be eligible for SSI. And Social Security's definition of blindness is that the vision in your better eye with correction is no better than 20/200, where your field of vision is no greater than 20 degrees. Next slide, please. So we said in addition to having a disability, you have to meet an income limit and a resource or asset limit. So what is the income limit? Well, it depends on the type of income the person receives. If the person has no other income, of course, they would meet the income limit. If they have other income that's only considered unearned, such as Social Security disability checks or pensions, annuities, dividends, interest income, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, variety of others, then the income must usually be under $770 a month this year, or under $791 a month starting in 2019. Now, suppose the person has no other unearned income. They're not getting Social Security or dividends or anything like that, but they are working. They have earned income, such as wages or earnings from self-employment. Then their earnings, their gross wages before taxes are taken out, must usually be under $1,585 a month in 2018, or under $1,627 a month in 2019 to be eligible to get at least $1 of SSI, which is the minimum you can receive. So I'm going to refer back to a point I made on the previous slide, that after the person has been determined eligible for SSI, they've begun to receive it, their earnings can then be above that substantial gainful activity level of $1,180 for 2018 or $1,220 a month for 2019. And they can be up to these higher limits here on this slide, and the person would still be able to get at least $1 of SSI. Next slide, please. And there's a limit on resources. So you may be wondering, what's the difference between income and a resource? I have a trainer friend who likes to say, income is what you get and resources are what you got, which is pretty accurate. If you receive money during a given calendar month, it counts as income for that calendar month. So it's income in the month that you receive it. If you have any of that money that you received in one month still unspent, or still not converted to a form of resource that's not counted for the SSI program, if you have any left over, as of midnight on the first day of the following calendar month, then it becomes a resource. So the month that you receive money, it counts as income. Any amount that you have left over that carries over into the next month becomes a resource. So typical examples of resources would be cash, bank accounts, stocks, bonds, CDs, money market accounts, other investments, the cash value of a whole life insurance policy, retirement accounts, and property other than your primary residence. But very importantly, there are loopholes. There are a variety of types of resources that are not counted against the limit for SSI. And the countable resource limit, the limit on resources they do count, is $2,000 for an individual, and it's $3,000 for a married couple. So some examples of resources that are not counted against SSI are the home that you live in. You could own $1 million home with no mortgage, own it free and clear. As long as you live in it, it will not count against that $2,000 resource limit. Also, one motor vehicle will not count against the limit. If you have more than one vehicle, then they will count the value of one of them, but not the one with the higher equity value. The one with the higher equity value they will not count. But if you have two cars, the one with the lower equity value will be counted against that $2,000 limit. If you have term life insurance that has no cash-in value, has only a death benefit, that doesn't count. Certain burial funds do not count. Special needs trusts, many of you may be familiar with, special accounts set up in such a way that the money can only benefit a person with a disability, but does not technically belong to the person with the disability. And the money can only be accessed by another party known as the trustee, rather than the person with a disability. That, if it's set up properly, a special needs trust, the money in it is not counted against the resource limit. Also, although it seems to be cut off on my screen here, there are a couple of other types of resources that don't count. Property used for a trade or a business, and up to $100,000 in an ABLE account. We'll talk more about ABLE accounts on the next few slides. But first, just wanted to pause and see if there are any questions or comments at this point.
There are, and let's see, and I'm going to try to ask this question generically. That there was a question of applying for SSI and had not heard back. And, oh, here it is. Here's the question. It says, I applied for my son in June. They haven't heard anything. And he does, and has a trust, a special needs trust, and wondered if that could possibly be causing a delay.
Well, it's not at all unusual for it to take more than 4 months to get a response when you apply for SSI, so I would not be alarmed. It is possible that the special needs trust could be a factor in the amount of time it's taking to get an answer. But more likely, it's the review of your son's disability. Usually the most time-consuming part of the application process by far is for an entity, a state agency called Disability Determination Services, which is hired by Social Security to make the disability decisions on the application, for them to make their decision on whether your son's disability meets Social Security's definition. So we are going to talk more, there are several slides about the SSI application process and how to speed things up a little further along in the presentation, so we will get to that.
Okay,
Any others, Renee?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me do a quick scan. It looks like, it says here, I have a parent that says, has a young adult that it won't ever be able to work and is living with them. Is there a limit on how much the other parent can make for her to be eligible for SSI?
If your child is 18 or older, then the parent's finances are not counted against your son's or daughter's SSI. If the child is under age 18, then a portion of the parent's money, income and resources, does count against the son's or daughter's eligibility for SSI, which is the reason that most children under 18 are not eligible for SSI, because their parents' money counts against them. But once they turn 18, only their own money counts. And that, as a result, many, many children become eligible for SSI when they become adults at age 18.
And there was also a question around, does the ABLE account allow someone to not have to spend down for Medicaid?
Well, we're going to talk about ABLE accounts on the next several slides.
Okay. So
I believe we'll be answering it then. Now, what I can tell you is that if a person receives SSI, as you'll see in several slides, they're automatically eligible for medical assistance, also known as Medicaid, without having to spend down. But yeah, I will be answering that question.
All right, and then a question just clarifying again that the $1,220 per month in 2019 limit, it was mentioned on the first slide.
Right.
What it is, yes, if you could.
Okay. In order to be considered disabled under the adult definition of disability that Social Security uses, a person has to have a disability that limits his or her ability to work and prevents him or her from doing substantial gainful activity or substantial work. Now, if a person is capable of earning at least $1,220 a month gross wages as of 2019, she or he may be considered capable of doing substantial gainful activity, although in some cases, earnings even higher than $1,220 may be considered below substantial.
Michael? Oh my goodness, yes, we did just lose Michael. Oh, well, as I said in the beginning, webinars are full of technical glitches. Please hang on for a moment, and hopefully Michael will be calling right back in. Hopefully he realizes his phone cut out. So I appreciate everybody's patience while I try to get Michael back. So please sit tight for just a moment. While we're sitting tight. Oh, good,
I'm
Michael.
Back. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I explained to everybody on the phone that I said in the very beginning that webinars are full of technical difficulties, and I appreciate everybody's patience. So, yeah, so why don't we just pick up right where you left off, sir?
Sure. I apologize. One of the downsides of country living, very poor cell phone reception. But in any event, once a person has been found eligible for SSI and they start to receive SSI, the substantial work requirement no longer applies. At that point, a person can earn more and still receive at least some SSI. Okay, any other questions, Renee?
Let's see, there's one around, do you need a lawyer to apply for SSI?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, good. And then the other one, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Michael. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. A lawyer is not needed to apply for SSI. If a person is denied and they appeal and they're denied again, so they've been denied twice, including the first appeal, many people at that point do hire an attorney to assist them with the third try, the second stage of the appeal, which goes before an administrative law judge. And the attorney is only paid if they win the appeal, and they get 25% of the back benefit that's awarded, because SSI is typically awarded retroactive to the month after the month in which the application was sent to Social Security. And if you have to appeal twice, it often takes over a year, sometimes even over 2 years to get approved. And Renee, I think we're going to move forward.
Yes, I was about ready to say the same thing, so thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so I wanted to give some information about ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are fairly new. The first ones began in the U.S. in June of 2016 as a result of a federal law that was signed by the president in December of 2014. And the ABLE Act made it possible for states to create these special accounts that would be set up only for people with significant disabilities. And the advantage to ABLE accounts is that the money saved in them does not count against the resource limit for SSI, medical assistance, and certain other public benefits. Now, one downside, one limitation to ABLE accounts is that the individual's disability has to have begun before age 26. Good news is, I imagine that's probably true for everyone or just about everyone on the call. So your disability had to start before you turned 26. However, you didn't have to open the ABLE account before you turned 26. You could be any age, 26 or older even, and still open an ABLE account so long as your disability began before you turned 26. Now, the first $100,000 that's saved in an ABLE account does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI and the Medicaid or medical assistance that comes along with SSI. It's very nice to know that you can save $100,000 in one of these accounts and still keep SSI and medical assistance. If your ABLE account has more than $100,000 in it, the amount above $100,000 will count against the $2,000 resource limit. Now, there's a limit on how much can be deposited into an ABLE account. It's currently $15,000 a year. And that would be from all sources. Anyone can contribute to an ABLE account. The person with a disability, a family member, an organization, anyone can. There are even some people who've set up GoFundMe accounts to ask strangers to contribute to their ABLE accounts, and some do. But the contributions of up to $15,000 a year are not subject to the gift tax. Next slide, please, Renee. So once you've put money into an ABLE account, you can withdraw the money for a variety of allowable purposes, including education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology, health prevention and wellness. Next slide, please. Financial management, legal fees, expenses for oversight and monitoring, funeral and burial expenses, and possibly other expenses that may be approved by the IRS in the future. Now, basic living expenses, housing, food, shelter, can be paid for out of money that's in an ABLE account. Some of you who have experience with special needs trusts might know that one limitation is if you use money from a special needs trust to pay for food or shelter or both for the person with a disability, that can cause the SSI to be reduced. But here's a nice little loophole. If the person has a special needs trust and also has an ABLE account, money can be taken out of the special needs trust and transferred into the ABLE account. And then, if money is withdrawn from the ABLE account to pay for food and shelter, the SSI will not be reduced. It's a nice little trick to be aware of. Next slide, please. So I think we've gone backwards. Okay. One more. That's it. Thanks. Thanks, Renee. Now, in many states, if a person has an ABLE account and there are funds remaining in the account at the time that they die, the person with a disability dies, the state can collect the remaining funds up to the amount that they've spent on medical expenses for the person through Medicaid since the account was created. Very fortunately, this year, Maryland passed a law that said Maryland will not do that any longer. So any money that remains in an ABLE account when the person with a disability, the account owner, dies, can be left to heirs. It's not claimed by the state. You can open an ABLE account in any state that allows out-of-state residents to participate, and there are 30-some states that allow that. However, in Maryland, there's an advantage to opening your account in Maryland if you're a Maryland resident, and that is that you and any other Maryland resident who contributes to your ABLE account can get a tax deduction of up to $2,500 a year for contributions to the ABLE account. Now, it's not a tax credit. It wouldn't save you $2,500 a year on taxes. It's a tax deduction, which would save you probably a little less than $200 in taxes for a $2,500 contribution. So Maryland's ABLE accounts began just almost a year ago now, end of November last year. And you can get more information about ABLE accounts in all states at ablenrc.org, or you can Google Maryland ABLE account and go to the website for Maryland ABLE. Next slide, please. So we've talked about disability, income, and resource limits. If a person's eligible for SSI, how much can they get? Maximum benefit in 2018 for an unmarried individual is $750 a month. That'll go up to $771 a month in 2019. Now, if a person is not paying for food and shelter, the maximum SSI they can get is reduced by 1/3. In 2018, the maximum would be $500 a month if the person doesn't pay for his or her own food and shelter, or $514 a month starting in 2019. Now, a person who has other income besides SSI will usually receive less than the maximum SSI, and that follows the logic of the program. If you have other income, then it's assumed that you won't need as much SSI to pay for food and shelter. Next slide, please. So suppose that you're getting the reduced amount of SSI, $500 or $514 in 2019, and you'd like to see if you could get that increased to the maximum, $750 a month in 2018 or $771 a month in 2019. Is there a way a person can do that? Yes, the person can begin to pay for food and shelter. There are two ways to do that. The first way is probably the less desirable for both the person and for Social Security. The second one tends to be more effective, but I'll start with the first one. If the person lives with family and the family says, we are living as a single economic unit, we're a family, we share expenses, we're combining our resources and and we're responsible for expenses together as a family, then to qualify for the maximum SSI, the person must pay for his or her fair share of food and shelter costs. So, for example, if there are 3 people in the family and the food and shelter costs for the family are $1,500 a month, then each person's fair share would be 1/3. Since there are 3 people in the family, 1/3 of $1,500 would be $500 a month. That's the amount the person receiving SSI would have to pay for food and shelter in this example to qualify for the maximum amount of SSI. Next slide, please. However, if you have an adult son or daughter, 18 or older, living with you, and you say, well, my son or my daughter is a separate economic unit. He or she is an adult. It's responsible for his or her own expenses to pay out of his or her own income. In other words, if your son or daughter is essentially like a boarder in your home, is an adult paying for food and shelter, then they just need to pay the same amount that you would charge an unrelated boarder. And if they pay that much for food and shelter, then they can get the maximum SSI if they have no other income. Now, many Social Security workers will basically take a parent's word for what they're charging their son or daughter, and that is the same amount they would charge an unrelated boarder, so long as the amount is reasonable. But other Social Security workers may look for evidence. I suggest that you go on Craigslist or some similar site and find rooms for rent and see what you can find, is the lowest rate for a room rent in your area, and then add an amount for food onto that amount, a reasonable amount for food, and say that that's what you're charging your son or your daughter. So then you'll have evidence that that's a reasonable market rate, since you've got an ad showing that someone else in your area was charging a comparable amount. And you can use the form that's linked on this page to document food and shelter payments. Next slide, please. So if a person receives SSI in any amount, from the minimum $1 to the maximum $750 a month or $771 a month starting in January, they're automatically eligible for a medical benefit known as medical assistance. It's also known as Medicaid, because rule number 1 for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is to give each benefit more than one name. If you get medical assistance or Medicaid, it covers a wide variety of medical expenses, pretty much everything you would expect health insurance to cover, plus some expenses that other health insurance will rarely, if ever, cover, such as services from the Developmental Disabilities Administration, personal attendant services, and even through local health departments, it even covers transportation to and from services covered by Medicaid. The person generally pays nothing for any service that's covered by medical assistance, except for a very small copay for prescriptions. It can be a challenge to find healthcare providers who accept medical assistance because it reimburses them at low rates. But every hospital and every pharmacy I know of accepts medical assistance, and a good number of healthcare providers do too. Now, we had a question earlier about a way to get medical assistance or Medicaid known as spending down. Spending down means that your income is generally too high to qualify for medical assistance in most ways, but you're going to take the excess income and pay for medical expenses with that. And that enables you to meet the income limit for medical assistance. An ABLE account will not help with a spend down if your income is too high. It could help with a spend down if your resources, your assets were too high. However, if a person receives SSI, they are eligible for medical assistance automatically without a spend down. And those of you who are not familiar with spend downs, you can ignore that part because it was probably totally Greek. Move on to the next slide, please. Okay. A person can have more than one type of health insurance. They could have private insurance, they could have Medicare, etc., and also get medical assistance. Medical assistance can sometimes cover some costs that the other insurance does not, or sometimes cover a portion of deductibles or co-insurance or co-pays. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think we'll pause for a few questions here again, Renee, before we talk about applying for SSI.
Sure. Let me scroll through here real quick. I'm trying to see. I think some of these, hopefully you have answered, just because there's lots of questions and folks are doing a great job.
Great.
As here, someone asked the question is, how far back does, they're saying DDS look at medical records? Is it helpful to take copies of medical records to Social Security when applying?
Okay. I am going to cover that shortly during the next few slides on applying for SSI.
Great. Okay, so here's another question. If the person uses medical food / formula paid for by Medicaid, is there a way to get the full amount of SSI funding? I see. Good question. Yeah, as I said, generally a person has to be paying for their fair share of food and shelter costs to be eligible for the maximum SSI. Now, if their food or a portion of their food is covered by medical assistance, in the case of having a special medically prescribed diet, or perhaps through a food assistance program like what's known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, and it's still generally known as food stamps, the portion of the food that's paid for by the other source, by food stamps or medical assistance, is not counted. And so long as the person pays for their fair share of shelter costs and any amount of food that they consume other than what's covered by food stamps or medical assistance,
as long as they pay for that portion that's not covered by the other sources, they can still be eligible for the maximum SSI. Very good question.
This one asks the question, if a child is adopted and receives a monthly adoption stipend by the state and has medical assistance, does this have to be claimed as income for the parents, and will it impact the child's eligibility before or after the age of 18?
I am going to need to answer that one separately.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's specific enough.
Sure.
To perhaps just a few people. I'd like to answer that offline.
Right, and the rest of the questions tend to be a little more specific in nature, so I will pass those on to you later.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Renee.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's get into how to apply for SSI. So you can do it several ways. You can call Social Security's toll-free number here on this slide to make an appointment to apply at the local Social Security office or to get a telephone appointment. And there are some forms that you can complete in advance, and you can see 3 of them listed toward the bottom of this slide. The Adult Disability Report, assuming the applicant is 18 or older, is going to be probably the most important of those, along with the SSI application. The authorization to release information just allows Social Security to gather documentation from medical providers, special education programs, etc. Next slide, please. Now, it didn't used to be the case that you could apply for SSI online, but that changed fairly recently, within the last year and a half, I think. And now some people can apply for SSI online at www.ssa.gov. If you're between the ages of 18 and 65, you've never been married, you're not blind, you're a U.S. citizen living in the U.S., you have not previously applied for or received SSI, and you're applying for Social Security disability insurance at the same time that you apply for SSI, that's automatic. If you apply for SSI, Social Security automatically determines if you may be eligible for Social Security disability insurance. So you can pretty much ignore that last bullet. But if you meet the first 5 conditions and the first 5 bullets, you can also apply for SSI online. Next slide, please. Is it easier to qualify for SSI once you're 18? Oftentimes it is, and I alluded to this in answer to one of the first questions. A child who's under 18 and living with one or both parents will have the parents' money, the parents' income and resources partially counted against the child when determining if the child is eligible for SSI. And this makes most children ineligible. So they're not eligible for SSI before age 18 because of their parents' money. But once you turn 18 and you're an adult in the eyes of the law, then only your own income and resources are counted. That's when many, many former children, once they become adults at age 18, become eligible for SSI because then only their own money counts. Now, if a child does qualify for SSI before age 18, either because their parents' finances are limited enough or because they're not living with parents, then when they turn 18, they have to go through something called an age 18 redetermination to see if they meet the adult definition of disability for Social Security which is different from the childhood definition of disability. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a few tips to help get SSI approved more quickly. One is to fill out the forms in advance before you have your appointment with Social Security, if you get an appointment rather than applying online. When you fill out the forms, particularly the disability report, you want to focus on how your son's or daughter's activities, especially those that relate to the ability to work, such as standing, walking, lifting, handling, seeing, hearing, speaking, following instructions, etc., how the disability limits their ability to engage in those activities. And now I'm finally going to answer the question about medical records. It is very helpful to get as many school and medical records in advance as you can that help verify your son's or daughter's disability. Now, if you ask Social Security, do I need to submit medical records with the SSI application? They'll tell you no. That's why you're filling out the authorization to release information so that Social Security can request the records and you don't have to. And while that is true, it's also true that you can speed up the application process very significantly if you can get copies of those records and submit them with the SSI application. Next slide, please. Also regarding the medical records, the most recent records are the most important, but if you have older records, it may help to submit at least a sampling of the old ones. I mean, if you've got records that go back to early childhood or birth, and you just submit one or two of them, then that can just show that the disability is of long duration, perhaps lifelong, and that may be helpful. But the most recent records are the most important. Now, Social Security asks you for more information. Of course, you want to provide it as quickly as possible. This next point is also very important. When you submit the SSI application to Social Security, they do an initial review just to see if the person meets all of the non-disability requirements to be eligible for SSI. That usually takes no more than a few weeks. Then they send the application on to Disability Determination Services, known as DDS, which is a state agency hired by Social Security to make the disability decisions on the application. And if you follow up with Social Security, find out when the application has been sent to DDS, then you can call 410-308-4350, the number at DDS, to get the name and number of the disability examiner who has the application. And then call that person, ask them if there are any records they are missing, if there's any other information they need. You'll be helpful to them, and they can be helpful to you by speeding up the disability review part of the application. Now, if they feel they don't have adequate records to decide whether the person meets the definition of disability, they will schedule a medical evaluation that they pay for. But you want to be sure that you keep the appointment. If you don't, that can substantially delay the application. Next slide, please. You always want to keep any information, letters, forms, etc., that Social Security sends you, and keep copies of anything that you send to them. And whenever you give Social Security anything, forms, letters, etc., if you can get a receipt or at least a date stamp on a copy of what you sent them, that's great, because they deal in so much paper that they inevitably lose things. And you want to have proof that you did in fact submit something in case they lose it. Next slide, please. So I am imagining that if you're on this call, chances are probably much higher than average that your son or your daughter would have been approved or will be approved for SSI on the first attempt. But nationwide, only about 30% of people who apply for SSI are approved on the first try. If you're denied on the first try, you should always appeal. Now, unfortunately, the first stage of the appeal, known as a request for reconsideration, has a lower success rate than the initial application did. So you're probably not going to win on the first level of appeal. But the third try, the second appeal, is often the charm. More than half of people whose initial SSI applications were denied will get approved on the third try, the second appeal. So you should always appeal and appeal again. You have to appeal within 60 days of getting the notice of denial, and you should use the request for reconsideration form that's linked on this slide. If you can come up with additional documentation of disability when you submit the appeal, that may be helpful as well. Next slide, please, Renee. Okay, and I think we'll pause for a couple more questions before we talk about what happens to SSI if you go to work.
Sure. Let's see. Let me skim these quickly.
Sure.
As we're trying to be mindful of the time.
Right.
It looks like you've answered most of these questions, and then again, some of them are very personal and unique to the family situation. So, which I will be sending those to you later. So I think we're okay for right now.
Great. Thank you, Renee.
You're
welcome. This is my favorite part of the presentation. What happens if you begin to receive SSI and then you want to go to work? Well, I know what happens. Someone is probably panicked about that because you've probably heard horror stories of people going to work and losing their cash benefits and their medical benefits, and it's very frightening. But I have good news for you, that there are a variety of safety nets called work incentives that can limit the effect of work on SSI and medical assistance. And in fact, in my opinion, they make it totally desirable for people to work without hesitation. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about 3 safety nets involving SSI and medical assistance. The first safety net can be summarized very simply. A person on SSI is always better off financially working than not working. And this is because your earnings will reduce your SSI, but not dollar for dollar. Earnings reduce SSI by less than half the amount of a person's gross wages. So, for example, if a person started out with the maximum SSI in 2018 of $750 a month, they could earn up to $1,584 a month in gross wages and still get SSI. If they earned that much, they'd get $1 of SSI. And obviously, getting $1,584 in wages and $1 of SSI, even though they might have to pay some taxes on the wages, they would be much, much better off than not working and getting only $750 of SSI. So when you get SSI, you're always going to have more money if you work than if you don't. Next slide, please. And I wanted to give you an example. So here's Marshawn, who started out getting only $750 a month of SSI, started a job and continuously got increases in hours. He started at 20 hours a week, then 30 hours a week, and finally 40 hours a week full-time at the current minimum wage of $10.10 an hour. Next slide, please. And here's a bar graph that shows you, oops, there you go. No, I'm going to go back a couple slides. Renee, we're going forward.
All right, hold on one second. I apologize. There we go. Sorry.
There you go. There you go. No problem.
More technical glitches. My apologies.
Yeah. At least you didn't hang up on everybody like I did inadvertently. So this graph shows Marshawn's income at the different earnings levels, and I subtracted taxes from his wages so you'd see what his true net income would be. The first column, he's not working, getting only $750 of SSI, which you see in blue. The second column, he's working 20 hours a week. His wages after taxes are shown in orange or pink or whatever color is showing up on your screen. And as you can see, his SSI is reduced. The blue goes way down, but his total net income is much higher than not working. Working 30 hours a week in column 3, the SSI is reduced even further. There's only a bit of a sliver of blue left, but he's got more in earnings, and his net income is substantially higher than working 20 hours a week. Finally, working 40 hours a week, he's earning enough to reduce his SSI to 0, but he is still significantly better off financially, even after taxes. He has more net income. Next slide, please. All right, the second safety net is that there are several work incentives, several rules that can enable a person to keep even more SSI than they would without these special rules. First one may be relevant if your son or your daughter is a student under age 22, attending high school, college, or vocational training. They can be eligible for something called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. This can let them earn up to $7,350 a year from wages, gross wages, without having their SSI reduced at all. And that annual amount will go up to $7,550 a year in January. This is a tremendous safety net because it means a person can try out work and not have the SSI reduced at all. They have to be a student under age 22. Next slide, please. And here's a quick example of someone working 14 hours a week at minimum wage, being able to, in column 2, keep the full amount of SSI instead of having it reduced and getting the wages in addition. Next slide. Suppose your son or your daughter is not a student any longer or is age 22 or older. They can't use the Student Earned Income Exclusion any longer. But if they pay for any expenses related to their disability or another medical condition that are needed at least partly for work, those can be subtracted from their earnings, which would keep their SSI higher. And they're called impairment-related work expenses. A person who meets Social Security's definition of blindness can deduct almost any work-related expense from their earnings and keep higher SSI payments and that rule is known as blind work expenses. Next slide, please. And finally, a person who wants to pursue a work goal and needs to pay for expenses to reach it, whether that's education, training, buying a car, computers, tools, equipment, uniforms, expenses to start a business, and use something called a plan to achieve self-support. And the expenses they pay for to reach the goal are subtracted from their earnings to let them keep more SSI to offset the costs. So the second safety net is you can get even more SSI than usual if you use one of these special rules. Next slide, please. The third and final safety net or work incentive we'll talk about today is my favorite. This is actually a double safety net. Those of you who were looking at the bar graph for Marshawn a little earlier might have been thinking, well, I can see Marshawn's income increases as his work hours increase. But in the last column, his earnings increased enough that his SSI went down to 0. What would happen to his medical assistance in that case? Would he lose it? Luckily, the third safety net says no, that's not the case. The third safety net is known as 1619B. That's the section of the Social Security Act that made this rule possible. And 1619B says, if your earnings from work rise high enough to reduce your SSI to 0, you can still remain eligible for SSI. That does two things. Number one, it protects your medical assistance. You can keep your medical assistance even though your SSI has been reduced to 0 by your work. And number two, if anything later happens to your job, if your earnings drop low enough, or if you stop work, you just have to call Social Security to get your SSI payments back. You do not have to reapply. Next slide, please. This is a tremendous safety net. It lets you keep your medical assistance, and it also lets you go quickly back onto SSI payments if anything happens to your job. And it can last indefinitely. To qualify, you have to meet certain criteria. You have to have earnings generally below about $40,000 a year, although there are exceptions when you could be earning even more and still qualify for 1619B. Still have to keep your countable resources under $2,000. Have to continue to need Medicaid. If you even just use it once a year, you'll meet that requirement. And there can't be other reasons that you lost SSI besides earnings. So if your disability got better, or if you won the lottery, or if you were awarded a big pension that put you over the income limit, you would not be eligible. But 1619B is a huge safety net, and in my opinion, it virtually eliminates any disincentive to work. It means you're always going to be better off working than not working if you get SSI. Next slide, please. And finally, how can you get help using these safety nets, these work incentives? Two ways you can get free help known as benefits counseling. You can contact the Work Incentives Network. Their toll-free number is listed here. They serve people throughout the state. Or if your son or your daughter has a case open with DOORS, the Division of Rehabilitation Services, DOORS can pay for benefits counseling. And I believe that is the last slide, Renee.
Great. Let me go back. Sorry, oops. I apologize. So let me run through these real quick so that I can get to the last slide for folks. Okay, so sure. I know we are over our time limit, which is why the webinar just bumped us out. So I apologize. I have some, so Michael, do you want to answer a few more questions? And how can
I'd be happy to.
And then how can folks get in contact with you while I'm pulling up some questions? Because there are some folks that have, you know, we had some that had some questions. I'm going to be sending them to you. But do you want to also share some contact information as far as just future?
Renee, I would prefer if people submitted questions to you, and then I can provide the answers.
Sure. Let's see. Does 619B apply to a person with SSDI?
No. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to talk about SSDI during this presentation. SSDI is a benefit a person can get that's based on disability, same as SSI, but instead of meeting income and resource limits, either the person with the disability or their parent must have worked and paid Social Security taxes. Now, if the person is getting SSDI based on a parent's earnings history, the parent must be retired, disabled, or deceased. Now, if a person receives, excuse me, $770 a month or more from SSDI, they will not be eligible for SSI, and the 1619B rule would not apply to them. However, there are some people who get less than $770 a month of SSDI and are eligible for at least a small amount of SSI. A person who gets both benefits, SSDI and SSI, can be eligible for 1619B. And since they'd be receiving only a small amount of SSI, it would not take much in earnings typically to reduce their SSI to zero. At that point, they could be eligible for 1619B, but only if they started out on at least a little bit of SSI. Good question. Thank you.
Let me ask one more. If a person is not getting the full amount of SSI, how do you get them to consider giving you the full amount? Is the appeal process the same?
I would recommend that actually just submitting evidence that that the person is paying for room and board. As I mentioned, the second option I mentioned, which is treating your adult son or daughter as if she or he were a boarder, a separate economic unit, that's the better way to go generally. You want to have a rental agreement, just a very simple one. I'd be happy to email you, Renee, a sample rental agreement that you could share with the audience, and just provide evidence that you are charging for room and board. Usually, that will enable the SSI to be increased 2 months later, 2 months after you start charging for the room and board. But I think that's the best way to go. It may not be necessary to file an appeal, but rather just simply to show that you know the documentation, the rental agreement, and receipts for the actual amount that your son or daughter pays for room and board, to increase the SSI from the reduced amount to the full amount.
Okay, well, thank you. And so we're looking at about 1:15. So what I'll do is I will gather these questions, and pass them along to you, Michael. And I just can't thank you enough. And I know there were lots of questions, but we will pass those on to Michael. And so I'm going to stop the recording.